Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Fuller here, and in today's video we're going to make this super cool 80s vibe monosynth that sounds like this. Now in our last video we made a polysynth, which is cool, and you might be asking yourself, well, what's the difference between a polysynth and a monosynth? Well, monosynth uses one voice to play all of the notes that it plays. It's kind of a classic 70s lead synth sound. The difference is with a polysynth you have multiple voices, so you can hold down chords and play bunch of notes at the same time. With a monosynth, whatever note you play, that's the only note you're going to hear. And you might be wondering, well, what's the purpose of that? Well, two reasons. One is it's a super cool sound. Because you're using the same voice for each note, you can create what's called a glide. And the glide is the distance, the amount of time it takes to get from one note to the next. So it gives it that slide up, that really unique sound. The other advantage is you're only using one Metasound, so you're saving the footprint of the game, so it's a lot more efficient. So let's jump in. So if we come over here and we look over here in our variable panel, over here in the details panel, you'll see this glide amount. So I set this variable up so that we could mess around with the glide. So here's what it sounds like with no glide in between the notes. Super boring. And then let's go all the way up to 1. You're going to hear a lot of glide. And somewhere in the middle, around 0.7, get this super classic 80s synth lead sound. So that's the cool thing about a monosynth. So let's jump on in and let's see how we built this. So we're only going to be using a couple basic assets here. We're using our Metasound Monosynth, which is a square wave that I built, which you should know how to do by now if you've seen my other videos. If not, you can go back and check those out. It's basically just a square wave oscillator with an ADSR envelope. And then it's running through a little effects here just for fun, the flanger delay. You don't need that, but it's fun. The frequency out has an input for pitch, which is very important. Obviously the pitch, we're going to need to be able to control that. And then also I have an input for glide so that we can expose that and change the amount of glide in the game. Then down here, and this is where it gets tricky now, because we have a monosynth. The only note, you can only play one note at a time, but the trick I was running into was, what if I press a few notes down and then I let one up, that would kill the sound. So I came up with a little bit of logic that allows you to count the trigger. So if you happen to press 4 notes down, even though you're only hearing the high note, when you release these other notes, the oscillator stays open until that final note is turned off. And that was tricky. It took me a little while to figure that out. And that's the cool thing about programming, is that sometimes you have to figure out a way around a problem. Now, there might be an easier way around this problem, and if you found one, I'd love to hear it. But this is what I did. I figured out that when you're playing a synthesizer, if I press down C, D, E, but then I lift up C, I want E to still be playing, so I want the oscillator to still be triggered on. If you press down 1 and you release 1, you want the oscillator off. But if you press down 2 keys, you want to release 2 keys before you turn the oscillator off. I hope that makes sense. It's kind of confusing, but so because if you do a run where you go C, D, E, F and you hold all those down and then you release these 3, you still want to hear that last note. And so that's what this logic allows us to do. And let's look at that real quick. So build this oscillator. If you haven't already, go back and check out my videos on how to do this. But it's pretty simple oscillator. Down here is where we have our print logic, our input logic. So we have 2 input triggers. We have a note on and a note off. And what that's going to allow us to do is to communicate to the sound when to play. So when we start the Metasound, this envelope filter has the sound closed. So when we trigger it on, it's opening the filter, and it's going to stay on until you release the note or close the filter. Now here's the logic for this. So when you, instead of just, normally we would go straight from the note on into the trigger attack and the note off into the trigger release. But again, that didn't work because of what I explained earlier. So what you got to do is you come down here. I created a trigger counter, which in my Metasound Basics video, you'll see all about triggers. I kind of walk through what all the triggers do. But you drag this off into a trigger counter, and you drag the output, the note off into a trigger counter. And then you use a trigger any. So basically, anytime a note is triggering on or a note is triggering off, it's going to trigger this. And that's going to go to a trigger compare. And so what we do here is when we turn on a note, it's going to count it, starting at 0 to 1. And it's going to register here, and it's going to come to this note, and it's going to say, all right, compare this to the trigger offs. Now, since we haven't played any note offs yet, we're going to have one trigger on and no trigger offs. So this is going to ask the program, is A equal to B? Is the note on equal to the note off? And if it's not equal, that means we want to keep the oscillator open, unless it's the very beginning, and we'll explain that in a second. So you press a note. Right now, you start the Metasound, there's no note ons, there's no note offs. So technically, it equals 0, right? So this would be true. But we also have a trigger once thing happening over here as well, and we'll see what that does in a second. So you start once, you press your note on. That's your A. So now you have one note on, and it's comparing it. Is note on equal to note off? Well, not yet, because you haven't released it. So what that does is that sends out not true, okay? So this is false right now, because until A and B are equal, this is going to be false. So you press your note, it compares it, it is false. So we get a trigger out of the false. So we trigger out here, and we're going to trigger once. And that is going to trigger the oscillator, and it's going to open the oscillator. Now you're going to hear the sound. So when we trigger this, we're going to hear the sound. Okay? If we trigger 2 notes, and then we trigger off, you see it doesn't turn it off. But if I hit it off again, it does trigger it off. And so why is that? Because when I hit play, when I hit note on, it has 1. When I play it again, it's gone up to 2. So 2 is not equal to 0. Now when I hit note off, it's 2 to 1. 2 is still not equal to 1. Now 2 is equal to 2, and it's true. So when it's true, what we do is we go out here and we go to the trigger release, which stops the note. So you have to release the same amount of notes that you press. And what this allows us to do, again, is it allows us to hold down as many notes as you want, but until you let go that same amount of notes, it's going to keep the oscillator open. Otherwise, it'll get real choppy. The other thing it does, when it is true, it resets this filter. Why? Because when we first start a note, we don't want it to trigger the oscillator envelope on and on and on and on and on. So what we do is we only trigger that once. So the very first note we press, it's going to come out of false, because it's not equal to the amount of releases, and then it is going to do this trigger once to open the envelope. However, once it triggers it once, that no longer works. So anytime you press play again, or you do note on again, you'll see it's blocking it. It's blocking it because it's a trigger once. But when we turn the oscillator off, we want to reset that trigger, open that trigger back up, so that we start all over. So this way you get a nice trigger on, play whatever notes you want, then trigger off, and then it resets. Otherwise, you'd be spawning a bunch of different notes, and you don't want to do that with the Monosynth. Once you press that note, that's it for that note. So that's kind of the logic. That's a little complicated, but go back and watch that if it's a little confusing. Here's kind of a blow up of this so you can set up yourself. Now, keep in mind, we're doing this in the actual Metasound. So once we get that, that's kind of like the heart and soul of the Monosynth. Now, let's go over to the actual, we're going to build a blueprint class for the Monosynth. So here's our Metasound, and then here's our blueprint Monosynth. And the way we're going to do this is relatively simple. We're going to create an event for each note, and then we're going to branch that to turn the note on or off. And then we're also going to use that to tell it what pitch to play, and we got a little simple animation here as well. So let's go ahead and jump in. Let's build this from scratch. We're going to go down here. We're going to right click. So this is how we implement our Metasound Monosynth. We're going to right click on here. We're going to go new blueprint class, actor. We're going to call this BP. We're going to call this Monosynth toot. We're going to open that. We've got nothing here. First thing we're going to do, we're going to dock this. This is the first thing we're going to do. We're going to dock this. We're going to bring in our Metasound. So now we have access to this Metasound. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to just make something to represent the key. We're just going to make a cube here. All right, we're going to resize this to 2, 0.25, 0.25. Perfect. We're going to color this. You know me, I like messing around with the colors and stuff. We're just going to make this wood. Now we've got our first key. We're also going to name this cube C. That's going to be our first key. And that's pretty much all we got to do for in here. Now we're going to go to the event graph. We're going to go in here and we are going to create an event. And this is important. So we're going to create a add custom event. We're going to call this play C. This is going to be the event that we use to communicate from the blueprint where the game where you press the QWERTY keyboard to trigger these events. Then we're going to come down here and we're going to drag in a reference to the Monosynth. We're going to go up here. We're going to call this execute trigger parameter. This should be very familiar to you by now. And we're going to call this note on because that's what this is in our Metasound. This input, we want this one, we want note on, we want note off. So we're going to go note on, then we're going to copy that, we're going to make another one, make sure we have the same target, and this one's going to be called note off. Okay, then what we're going to do is we're going to come off this play C. I want to add this input variable and I want to call this is playing. What this is going to allow us to do is going to allow us to toggle that on and off when the note is being played. So we're going to come off here, we're going to pull off a branch. And then when this branch, the condition is going to be, is it playing or not? And when it's true, when it is playing, we're going to trigger the note on. When it is not playing, we're going to trigger the note off. We also want to make sure this default value is set to false, because otherwise it'll start playing as soon as you turn it on. So I'm going to stay there. That looks good. And then the other thing we want to do is we want to actually tell it what note to play. Remember, we've got this variable inside here called pitch. Not variable. We got this input on our Metasound called pitch. Now we want this to set float parameter for the MS Monosynth. And it drags our reference in for us. We'll just set this down here for now. Get this out of the way. And then since this is going to be our C note, we want to set this to 60, which is middle C. And we also want to make sure we name this pitch. Again, this is the input for this Metasound called pitch. So now when we execute this event, we will actually hear the pitch that we want. But we're one step away. Now what we need to do is we need to bring this into the blueprint level, the event level, and we need to create a key input that triggers this play event. The other thing we can do if we want to get a little bit fancy is we can animate it. So right now this doesn't do anything, but we'll animate it in a second just to give us a little visual feedback. Now we're going to go to our game, go to our level. Now, so we've got our blueprint class set up and we've started building it. We've got one note, we've got C, we've got our Metasound, and now what we're going to do is we're going to bring in our blueprint class that we just made. Now, one thing to consider that I have not done yet is I want to expose this glide input. So I want to come back here and I want to go over here and I want to add an event begin play, and I want to set float parameter from the MS Monosynth. That's our sound we're using, our Metasound. And I want to set this in glide. And I want to set this as a variable. We're going to promote this to a variable. We're going to call this glide. This is how we allow us to expose that. Then we're going to hit instance editable. So now, when we come into our world and we see this variable right here, glide. And we're just going to set that to 0.5. Now you can also, on this variable, set the default. After you compile it, you can go in here and you can set the default variable. Let's set the default to 0.8. Now our glide is going to be 0.8. Let's comment this out because that's all we need for that. Glide amount, we'll call that. That'll set our glide amount. And the glide is, again, that's the distance in between pitches. The pitches in between the pitches when you play them. So now we have that. If we press play, nothing happens because we have to execute this. We have to create some execution action here. So now we want to go into our level blueprint. We want to create a reference to the Monosynth. And what we want to do is we want to execute an event. We want to trigger an event. So we're going to over here and we're going to call this play. If you type play, you'll see right here the function that we created called play C. That is the function that we created in here, this custom event. So when we are in here, whatever we do is going to trigger this, and it's going to trigger, you can either trigger this to true or false. We're going to leave this on true because when this happens, we want to trigger it to true. So we're going to come off here and I'm going to do a keyboard input. So let's do Qwerty. Let's just do the letter C because that's the note we're going to start on. It makes sense to kind of start on the C because you got a kind of chromatic layout here. When I press this, it is going to play this event. Okay, so now when I press the C on the Qwerty, it's going to turn this playing variable, which is here, into positive, which will start the note on. And let's test that out. Pressing C, and there you go, it's playing the note. Now we need to do a note off for the same thing. And what we'll do with this, we'll copy this over, but we're going to make this false. So when we release it, it targets it to false, which is going to turn, oops, we got to make this target, there you go. Now when I release the C, it's going to turn it off. Oh, one thing I do need to, I had these reversed, so we got to, when you press C, it plays and it turns is playing to true, and then when you release C, you want it returning to is playing as false. So then when you do that, we get this. Get a little closer here. So there it is. So now we're getting the note. Now the other thing I want to do is I want to let's go into the viewport here and let's create another one of these. Let's call this D. We'll just move this over here. We're going to call this one D because it's going to be the note D that we're playing. And just make sure these are both, yep, parents under the Metasound. Okay, so now when we go to the event graph, we're actually going to copy all of this for our next note. But what we want to do is we want to come off of here and we want to create another custom event, add custom event. We're going to call this play D. Now you can kind of see the pattern here. You got to do this for every note that you want to do. So we're going to come in here. We're going to add a variable. We're going to call this is playing. I want to make sure we name that the same because we're going to be referencing those. Is playing, and same conditions. Note on. Now we want to change this pitch though up. We want to go this up 2 half steps, 1 whole step to D. So now when play D is triggered. So we're going to come down here. We're going to actually add, let's go keyboard. Let's make this V, the letter V, because it's right next to C like a D would be on a keyboard. We're going to go into V. And then when V is pressed, we're going to get a reference to the Metasound Monosynth tutorial. We're going to come in here, we're going to create reference to Monosynth. Then in this one, we are going to play D. And we're going to on press, make that true. Then we're going to copy this over. When we release it, we're going to make it false. And what's this doing is it's now triggering the play D. So let's compile that. Oops, didn't, again, got to make that target, drag that off to there, same target, compile, now let's play it, and we'll get C and D. Now we don't have much glide, but we can fix that. Let's take this up to 0.8, and let's hear the glide. That's the magic of the Monosynth, is that glide. You want that glide in there. Now let's just do a quick animation just to give us a little bit of visual feedback. So we're going to go in the viewport. We're going to click over here. We're going to animate these real quick. Just a real simple animation. If you want a more complex animation, you can go back and look at my polysynth video. We're going to go over to the event graph. And then when we trigger this one, we're going to cube C. We're going to set rotation. Oops. We're going to go over here. We're going to go set rotation, set relative rotation when we hit play. And we're going to set that to 10. Okay. On release, we're going to set relative rotation to back to 0. Actually, we're going to go -10. Otherwise, it'll be lifting up. And if we look at this, there it is. Now it is going the other way because we are actually facing the wrong direction. Let's go over here. Let's run our dude over here. There we go. Now when we start, we'll see that C when we press that down. Let's lift that up just a little bit. There we go. So that gives us a quick animation. We'll do the same thing for the D. We're gonna pull in the cube called D. We're gonna set that as the target here. And we're gonna come over here, same thing, we're gonna go -10. Boom, now we'll get animations on the C and the D. And let's add one more note. So we're gonna come in here and we're going to add one more event. We're gonna create custom event. We're gonna call this play E. We're gonna copy a lot of this same stuff here as we did with the other ones. Copy V. Whoa, whoa, whoa. And go here, we're gonna copy and paste on the play E. So we're just copying all that logic. All this should be the same. We do need to change the note to 64. And we also need to change this reference to cube E. Oops. Didn't want to do that. Change this. Oh, we got to make a cube. Let's make one more. Let's copy that. Make that here. And we're going to call this cube E. There we go. Now we're going to go back to the event graph. We're going to pull that in. That's going to be our reference for the animation. And if I did all that right, that should work. And then we got to add a key press over here. So we're going to come over here and we're going to add keyboard. And we're going to make the E note the letter B because that is in order. Then we're going to come over here, same thing. We're going to grab a reference to this, create reference, and then we are going to play E, and there it is because we've compiled. I'm going to target that, and then oh, you know what? We didn't add the we need to add a variable to this. So we need to add a is playing again. You can forget this stuff, so it's good to kind of see me screw all this stuff up. So then we go over here, boom. Now when we go here, we have this is playing variable on true. We're going to copy that. When it's released, it is going to go to false. We're going to compile. Oh, again, drag this target. Make sure your target is targeting the same Metasound. I'm going to go over here and compile. There it is. Oh, but we didn't do the release right. Need to make sure that that's on. Is playing is off. Yep, that looks good. Boom. Save. Compile. Why isn't it? Let's see here. Node on, node off, monosynth. I did do that fast. Oh, here's why. Because I didn't link the condition. Boom. Now it's updating the condition and it'll work. Let's do this thing. Perfect. Super awesome. So there is our basic monosynth logic. Awesome stuff. So that is how you build the monosynth concept, and you can get that really cool glide in between the notes and use one Metasound to do all of this cool synth stuff. Obviously, you can go back to the Metasound and change the sound of the synthesizer and all that stuff just by manipulating that one voice. So also, if you have any comments or suggestions in the video, please put those in the link below. Would love to hear your feedback, and would love to also hear what kind of content you guys want. I'm going to be doing some Foley stuff in the future and some sound design, and then also building like an entire music system from the ground up, a procedural music system. So anyways, thanks for checking out the video, and we'll see you in the next one.